And thank you for listening. I'm Scott Sullivan, Discipleship Catalyst with the Georgia Baptist Mission Board, and our team exists to strengthen Georgia Baptist churches in the area of discipleship. We've developed 3 tools just for you. The Watershed Principle, which identifies the 6 main ministries of the church that must be healthy to produce world-impacting disciple makers. The Spark Conference. Last year's conference saw over 33,000 views from 45 different states and 18 countries. This year's conference will premiere on August the 12th with best-selling author Tony Evans, Ben Mandrell, president of Lifeway, and David Kinnaman, the president of the Barna Group. We also have learning communities that are set up throughout Georgia, which exist to help you finish the task of leading your family in ministry well. You can see our website to find one near you. Also, every Thursday at 3 p.m., you can catch this broadcast through Facebook, Instagram, or multiple podcast platforms. Now, let's join today's broadcast. Welcome, friends. We have a strong discussion lined up today with Bryan Rose, Senior Lead Navigator with Auxano, former campus pastor at the Met in Houston, and he has a master's degree in Christian education from Southwestern Seminary. Bryan, thanks for being on with us, buddy.
Man, I'm excited to be here, Scott. Thanks for having me on, and I love what you guys are doing over here in Georgia.
Absolutely. Now, give us just a brief version of your family, because you got some really cool dynamics happening in your family, and just a little bit about what you're doing with Auxano.
Yeah, that's great. I live right outside Nashville now, in the Nashville area, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Probably familiar to most Georgians there. And I've been married for 26 years. We have 2 children, a junior in high school and a 6th grade son. Our daughter is the junior in high school, and we adopted both of our kids. So really cool story of how God put our family together through the years. I have an undergraduate degree in architecture from Mississippi State. So I grew up in North Alabama, but Auburn was the only school that offered architecture in the state. So I left and went to Mississippi State and thought I was going to be an architect. We ended up through some circumstances of my wife being on church staff. We ended up in Fort Myers, Florida, where God really cemented a call to ministry. And I did 1 semester of the New Orleans extension in Miami and thought, you know what, we need to be on campus. So we moved out to the Dallas-Fort Worth area and served on church staff out there. Just kind of immediately went on a Friday architecture to Monday youth pastor. You can imagine that went well. And so, served on staff there in the Dallas area during seminary, was actually in Northeast Georgia for a season after that, up in the Athens area. So love Georgia, especially that part of the world up there. Not a Dogs fan, but, still love that area and appreciate the program and everything there. And then moved to Houston. As you mentioned, I was on staff there, started multi-site. So what's fun is, it was kind of a church replant there in Georgia, church of 3,000 plus in Houston, helping them design and execute really a multi-site strategy. And I like to say that I've done everything in ministry staff-wise, but put my head on the pillow as a senior pastor. And I've been a part of Auxano really from the beginning, but 8 years ago, stepped on in a full-time role there, serving churches through our calling there. And Auxano, if you don't know, is a church really strategic planning, visionary planning. We walk alongside church leaders. Really, we help growth-minded senior pastors achieve collaborative progress through organizational design. So we really want to make sure we help churches be the best version of themselves they can be. And so we do that by creating, breakthrough clarity with the team and really articulating, hey, this is what we're here to do in this time and this place. So again, that's just a quick thumbnail sketch of my bio, but I'm happy to be on here and serve you guys this morning. Love, again, what you guys are doing in Georgia, and really appreciate, Scott, your leadership in the disciple making world there.
Yeah, it's really good, Bryan. And I'm a fan of Auxano. I've got several of my buddies that have been through that process, and the laser target focus that you guys have helped churches do. And that's our language. We talk it all the time, and we're grateful for that. Now, for those of you engaging, thank you for jumping in and listening or viewing, depending on what platform you're coming in with us. Let me just remind you, that Georgia Baptist Discipleship is a product of the cooperative program dollars that you give. So thank you for giving to CP. And we want to give a stack of resources away. So if you will, leave a comment and you'll be entered into a drawing at the end of the broadcast. So Bryan, let's jump in here. First question I've got for you, because you are traveling across the country, hundreds and hundreds of leaders and churches that you're engaging with, talking with. So here's my thought. Churches surveyed a pretty good bit during COVID, just trying to figure out, because everybody was in that oh crud mode. What do we do? What do we do? They're surveying, they're asking, why should churches survey again now that things are beginning to open back up?
Well, I think Scott, that you're right. They surveyed a lot because we didn't know what was going on, and we just didn't even know where people are. I'm not sure that that's changed, even though the sentiment and mood of leadership generally is up some. We're not in that, oh my gosh, what's happening next mode. We're kind of in that, oh, things are getting better mode. And listen, that's always our temptation, right? Our temptation is to just assume that the best is yet to come, which it is. We know the end of the story, but that we don't need to make any tweaks in the day-to-day. And so I think it's important for us to constantly not over survey. I'm not talking about giving the CVS receipt that's like 4 feet long, kind of a thing. But I do think that when you read Ephesians 4 and we see our calling as leaders in the church through the different lenses that the Apostle Paul outlines there, to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. It's hard to equip people if you don't know who they are and where they are. It's hard to equip people if you don't understand, what's going on in their lives, what they feel about things. And so what I think happens is we create unintentionally as leaders some gaps. We create gaps because we tend to, when things are going good, rely on anecdotes, those favorite stories we have, those people we're really connected to, or assumptions because we see something, so we think it's going to be a certain way. And so right now, I think it's even more important to find out how our people are doing first and foremost. Are they really doing better? Secondly, what anticipation do they have looking forward? We've seen, sorry, I was just on a call this morning with a pastor in Easley, South Carolina. I've been on calls all week with leaders. Easter seems to have been phenomenal, right? I mean, people saying, hey, listen, it's almost 2019 levels, if not more. But yet we had extra services, extra venues, and some other things going on. So there's a little bit of a scramble happening now. In the midst of all that positivity, what can we expect? And so there's a few gaps, I think, that are opening up now. Buy-in, is there really the same level of buy-in as there were, pre-pandemic? Are there some understanding gaps? Like, do we know what's really important right now? Because to think that the world hasn't changed over the last 12 to 14 months would be naive. The definition of insanity is doing what we've always done and expecting different results, right? And so, there could be this thing, well, if we make the assumption that, man, let's just get everybody vaccinated and it's going to be like it was, that could be a mistake. I mean, options for staying home and worshiping now, that's kind of been normalized, different modes of life. I mean, just the political unrest, the social unrest, there's a lot that's taken place even beside the pandemic. So I think understanding some of those things, what are we prioritizing as leader? What are the people seeing as challenges? I think there's a gap there. In that there may even be some spiritual hurdles and hangups happening over the last 12 months. I mean, people really had a gut check of their faith, and we've seen leadership changes in the national landscape of church leadership over the last 12 months. So I think there's just a lot going on now, and it's important to understand where our people are. That was a short answer. I can give you a long answer if you want. No, I'm just kidding.
No, that's good. And so our team has a saying, you got to inspect what you expect. Yeah. And I believe those top priorities for any ministry, I think they really should be regularly assessed. Are we tracking with this? Are we accomplishing our goals? Are we hitting some marks? Now, let me double click on a thought here that kind of what you alluded to just now. So are you seeing a difference between churches who regularly assess health and those who don't? And if so, how often do you recommend a leader assess the health of their church? In
a pre-pandemic kind of normal church life phase, we would say a major congregational survey every 2 to 3 years, just because, and this is, we're talking disciple making now, Scott. How do we know our disciple making is effective, right? If we're not actively measuring, how people, and listen, to say we're measuring someone's spiritual growth, I know is a challenge. I know that, like, how do I inspect the fruit, so to speak? But we can set up systems. That's what we do with Auxano. We help church leaders set up a language where people can self-assess, right? Where it's a common language everyone in the church shares of, hey, this is what a disciple does. My home church here in Murfreesboro, we talk about small group in terms of who are my refrigerator friends, right? And so, do you have people in your life that have refrigerator rights? They can just come open your fridge and get something out. They don't have to ask permission. Like, if not, you may not be in biblical community. Last night, my wife and I, we have a college small group. So we had, 8 college kids over, and one of our college students says, hey, can I use the ketchup? Is there some ketchup I can use? Because we feed them every week. We realize that's the best way to keep attendance numbers up with college kids. She's like, can I use some ketchup? And in the midst of a national ketchup shortage, I was like very generous and said, sure. But I had to remind her, I'm like, look, you can get into our refrigerator. If you need something, open up the refrigerator. This is the level we're playing at now. Yeah. And you can just see on her face like this, there's someone else besides my family I can do that. And so if you create language like that, then you can start asking questions on a regular basis to assess, hey, how are we doing? How many of our people are in these type of relationships? You measure generosity, you can measure personal spiritual growth, but it starts with having the common language. So pre-pandemic, we'd say every few years, we need to just make sure our processes and systems are producing what we hope they are. In the pandemic now, I think we have to keep a little bit closer tabs. Now, listen, you can't do a 40-question survey congregation-wide every few months, but I do think it's helpful to just say, hey, as the shepherd or under shepherd here of this flock, a shepherd isn't any good if they don't know how the flock's doing, if they don't know the health of the flock, if they don't regularly inspect. And so in a world where we can't get to everybody's door or sit in everybody's living room like we used to, it's helpful to just give a quick pulse. We call it a pulse survey. Hey, how you doing? What are you struggling with right now? What's most helpful to your spiritual growth right now? Just 3 or 4 questions that you can ask on a regular basis. And I'd say at a minimum, every 6 months or so, just as there is a speed of change right now with things. Maybe we'll get to the place in a year or 2 where we can kind of get back into that groove. But, if it's not COVID, it's something else, and so I think it's helpful for the shepherd to know where the flock are.
It's really good. Now, listen, if you're watching or viewing, listening to this broadcast, and you have created one of those surveys, we'd love for you to drop that in the chats right now so others can see how you've surveyed, what your top 2 or 3 questions you've been asking, because Bryan, what you're saying, I think, is huge. And by the way, I'm writing down refrigerator friends, and I am going to use that. I'll give you credit, but man, that's good. I love that.
Listen, there's nothing new under the sun. You don't have to give us credit for that. We've used that. A number of different churches have taken a form of that. I love to ask, do you know where the trash can is? How many people do you know in your life that you know where the trash can in their kitchen is? Like, if you have never thrown something away in somebody else's kitchen, you're not in biblical community. Right? It's just not happening in that way. So I love that. Just
not as close as you think you are.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
And here's a thought too, Bryan, because we've got some leaders right now that are going to be listening and watching, and they're not assessing. They haven't done a survey, and they're probably sitting there thinking, "Man, I'm just not sure. Things are pretty good in my church." So here's my thought: if you know the foundation of your house is cracked and then gradually falling off, what do? You fix it. If the relationship with your spouse is growing emotionally cold, do you sit there and say, we can just kind of roll with where it is, or do you do something about it? And I just maybe take 20 seconds, 30 seconds here, just speak to that pastor that might be listening and saying, I'm just not sure, because where we are, things are pretty good. The money stayed reasonably healthy during this. The numbers are decent during this time. What would you say to that pastor who really doesn't see the need for survey, for assessment?
Yeah, I would first very lovingly remind that leader that things don't tend to drift towards better. You know, we know that biblically, right? We see how things are gonna be in the end days, and I don't know whether the end days are soon. I like to keep that posture that our forefathers in the faith, you know, kept, that it could be any moment. So we need to act as if. But things don't tend to drift towards the better, right? Mission tends to drift away from that. Families are becoming more and more busy outside the church. And here's the reality. As things open up, everyone in your community who has been missing people and relies on restaurants to feed people, clubs, organizations for dues, and I mean events, theater, arts communities that's anxious to pack people back in so they can get the ticket sales. Everybody is looking for time and money right now from your people. And listen, your people are gonna be tempted to, in very philanthropic ways, support that. And I don't have anything against that. I do think, though, that a church can't be passive now, because what's gonna happen is that we're gonna see that just like your relationship doesn't drift to getting stronger, everything has to work there. You're gonna have to work to really re-engage and provide meaningful activity. And that's why I think a survey is important. Meaningful activity looks different around a church conference room table than it does maybe around a family's dinner table when it comes to church. Like, are they feeling the meaning? Are we providing value and meaning? Because listen, if we're not, then they're going to get more meaning from the ball field, because little Johnny is going to be a professional ball player, or they're going to get a scholarship one day, something like that. So listen, here's the temptation, Scott. And listen, I do this all the time. The temptation is to just kind of not act, to like, you know, something needs to be fixed, like the foundation thing. Like right now, it's been raining all morning here in Tennessee. And I know if I open up my crawl space, there's probably going to be water under there. I've been putting off calling those people that are going to come out and fix that, because I just don't want to deal with it. I just don't want to deal with the hassle. Here's the problem. At some point, that's going to turn into a bigger problem. And so, you know, I've got to do something about it sooner rather than later. And I think that applies to all of us in leadership. If we sense there's some kind of drift or weakness or crack or something happening there, the better we can step in. And you know, we have plenty of proverbs that talk about, you know, wisdom and wise counsel, some of those things. And that's the joy of what I get to do at Auxano. I get to walk alongside church leaders in a very loving way, help them see those things, and maybe even say the things they knew already, but just use different words from a strategic outsider perspective, and just and walk with them through it. It's always better if you know someone's there with you, right?
Yep, so good. And listen, we've got a tool here in our Georgia Baptist Convention that's called the Church Assessment Tool. So if you guys want to engage in that, just to help you know what we would say are the areas of top growth that for future growth in your church. If you want to take that assessment, just go to gabaptist.org, and then you'll see a square that says Church Assessment Tool. You can click on that, take it. I mean, it's less than 5 minutes. It's not super thorough, but can help you there. And Bryan, you've got some tools there with Auxano as well, right?
Yeah, we do. You know, one of the big ones right now is the Church Next survey, and that's just one that we're kind of releasing out there. It's a lower cost. It's less than $200, but $1 less than $200, right? It's $199. So it feels good to say less than $200. But really, what it does is it's a 12-question survey. Again, one of those pulse surveys for your congregation. The advantage here, I mean, listen, I'm an advocate. If you can use SurveyMonkey and survey your congregation with that, go for it. If you don't need to spend money, if you've got time to put together the questions and responses, if you got time to do the analysis, if you got time to do those things, that's great. Save a couple $100. If you don't have time for that, we've put together the tool, the Church Next Survey tool for you. What we'll also do is we'll also benchmark against other churches nationally and regionally, some of those things where you can see not to kind of how we measure up, but just it's always helpful to know we're not the only ones struggling with this, or, oh man, there is hope. There's some encouragement when we look at a broader picture of that. One of the other things I love, Scott, is the way you guys have set up your leadership across the state, especially within the disciple making. Like, you have leaders in position in those regions of the state to walk alongside these pastors. And so whether they use the in-house survey tool with you guys, the assessment tool, whether they use our kind of national tool or even just kind of set something up on their own. I love that you guys are a resource to those pastors. No pastor in the state of Georgia should feel alone right now, because of the way you guys are in your leadership through that. So, whether or not they choose to reach out for help, that's the other question, right?
Great word. Now, listen, we just given you two, at least two options there, and we'll put links to both of those in the chats for you to consider. Now, let me jump to a second question. Actually, I think I've already asked you three, but they were follow-ups that you and I, some of them we didn't really plan on. I just love the engagement of what you're talking about. So if it's true that churches need to assess regularly, okay, and I think we both would agree with that, what are some top areas that leaders need to be considering and areas that maybe leaders are missing information right now?
Yeah, and so I'll come back to that one that I think is the most critical, Scott. I think we make assumptions that people are growing just because they're attending something. And, attendance does not equal maturity. We see over and over again in God's word, like the people who attended synagogue the most, the people who were, most maybe in those things were not necessarily the most spiritually mature because, listen, they missed some of that relational piece. And so I think, understanding our disciple making outcomes, what does a disciple look like in our context? Like that's very passionate for me. Like under each church should have this palette of language of what a disciple looks like in our context. And again, I'm a little biased because that's what I do for a living. I help churches define that. But one of those pieces of that is saying, hey, listen, if we're not regularly saying, hey, these are the 5 to 7 most important qualities of maturity, and we're not kind of monitoring that, that's important. Because listen, you can fill a congregation, a worship center, and not see people filled with the Spirit of the Lord. You can make budget and not make disciples. And I think that's one of those things. We look at those numbers. Numbers have been strong over the last year. Most of the churches we interact with reported, strong giving, even attendance, however you want to figure that. If we want to pretend like that, 20-second view online counts as somebody going to church that Sunday, that's great. I'm with you on that. Whatever it takes. The reality though is that that's not necessarily indicative of disciples made. And so that to me is the strongest passion, is saying, hey, listen, and then coming back around and saying, hey, are we providing meaning? What part of what we're doing is influencing your spiritual growth the most? What part is not? How do you see yourself involved? Are your kids going to get plugged back in? Some other questions we like to ask. What's your plan for worship attendance? What's gonna most influence your return to in-person ministry on a regular basis? If there's something we can do in our community, what is that? And really kind of reminding people that we have a calling here that's not just to gather every week, which we've missed over the last year, but our calling is to be scattered after we gather to have impact in our community and on people's lives. And so I think those things are probably the most critical things to measure. First, our disciple making. Is it working? Second, are we providing value? Is what we're doing here impacting people? And third, are we reminding people that the mission of the church exists outside the church walls? It is the Great Commission, which begins with go, right? And so that's how I would say the top 3.
That's good. And Bryan, here's the deal, man. If Georgia Baptist Convention fails, if Christians fail, if Auxano fails at anything, it cannot be at the greatest mission that the Lord gave us, to make disciples of Jesus. It just can't. And that's why this discussion of what we are talking about is so important. So let me land the plane for us here, because Auxano exists to help churches move towards health, just like our convention does as well. Yeah. So what does Auxano bring to the table that leaders can't get by doing it themselves? For example, why should somebody pay you guys? And the reality is, you guys are trying to help churches, but this is also how you make your living. So there's a charge for this. Yeah,
that's a fair question. I think it is a matter of what I said earlier, and just in time. The books that are out there that we use, that are our core tools, from our founder, Will Mancini, Church Unique, God Dreams, it's all there. I mean, listen, for the price of a book, you can get some of the best content The reality is, though, is that it's always a factor of time. Most pastors I know, even executive pastors in the kind of just don't have the time to prepare, to get everybody there, to facilitate. I mean, there's a little bit of built-in accountability. Also, you really, when you make an investment into something, you tend to treat it a little differently.
It's true.
And so, if you've ever we've never bought a brand new car, but those new to me cars, there's something about like that first one I bought, I took care of it better than the one my parents gave me. Yeah. Right. And so I think there is something in our psyche toward, hey, when we make an investment of time, make an investment of resources, we tend to do. And so that's really when people ask me why do you guys charge consulting, retainers, some of those things? I was like, because without that, listen, we all love free stuff, but if something is easily gotten, it's easily lost. Mm-hmm. And so, man, when we put an investment of time, we put an investment of resources, we've also been doing this for almost 2 decades now. So we've been at this for 17, 18 years now. And the ability to bring experience from other places, to be able to kind of navigate through challenges. Many pastors need that person to serve as a strategic outsider. I love it when a pastor can just sit back and watch. I think about Jeff up at Christ Place, right? When he can sit back in his meeting and watch his staff, watch his leadership interact, and not have to be the one that's always up front, prepared, talking, but can kind of lead from that role there. It's always advantageous to not be the leader in the room at some point with your team, so you can see your team from a different perspective. So I think that's it. I mean, I think the reality of it is we try to do things for churches at all scales and sizes. We try to provide. We've done cohorts for churches, 200 or less, that were just kind of virtual and online, and providing some resources there. Not every church can invest in bringing me out once a month for 9 months, 10 months. We also do trainings. Like we're also, working with the Georgia Baptist to do some training to bring the tools so that you guys can be on the front lines with the same tools we have and serve churches that, again, our passion is for the kingdom. We know we're not going to be able to reach every church, but listen, we believe that every church needs clarity. Every church needs to understand what the Great Commission looks like in their place. Because as you said earlier, if we fail in the Great Commission, what else are we here to do? Like, what else did Jesus call the local church to do, if not the Great Commission? We're spending way too much time on arguing some things that Jesus would be like, why are you guys talking about that?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, hey, listen, Peter would be like, hey, remember when I said, it would be like, hey, listen, what is it that, why are we not more effective in the community? Where have we surrendered? Why are our families not the outpost of disciple making, across our communities and across our state? I mean, those are the things that keep me up at night and keep me motivated. And we just love getting to do that. I don't know if you felt the passion there, Scott. Sorry. I know I'm answering all your questions very long.
No, it's good. And I love what Todd Bolsinger wrote in Canoe in the Mountains. He said, there's no greater responsibility or gift a leader can give than to have the clearest, most defined mission possible. And that's what we're trying to do through Georgia Baptist Discipleship. But it's also what Auxano does. And Bryan, we consider you guys an ally to help us accomplish the goal that God's given us as a convention, which is heavy. To create disciple-making churches that create disciple-making churches and disciple makers. So thank you for what you're doing. And Bryan, any final thoughts, rebuttals, or moments of deep consternation that you would mention?
Wow, when you give me the opportunity for all that, just to this conversation, or rebuttals, deep consternation in general? Because I have a couple things. No. Listen, I love getting to talk leadership, especially disciple-making leadership, with passionate leaders like yourself, Scott, that I know leads a team across the state. We treasure the work. I've gotten to work with Mississippi, Kentucky, North Carolina, Georgia. I mean, I'm a Southern boy, so across the South, getting to work with state convention leadership and really equip at a level to reach churches that it's a joy, and I'm thankful to get to do it every day. And I appreciate you inviting me on to this morning.
You bet. It's my heart as well, Bryan. Thank you for what you do. And as a senior lead navigator for Auxano, we appreciate you jumping on with us, Bryan Rose.
Love
and,
it.
Let me also send a thank you to Mike Tiny Taylor, our producer this morning. Mike, thank you for always making yourself available here and there to get these things produced. And let me just say a thank you to those of you that are listening or engaging through the broadcast. And if this has been helpful, please share this link to our Georgia Baptist Discipleship group. It's to help us maximize our ability to make world-impacting disciple makers. Thank you for listening. And we want to give you a gift, the 5 discipleship shifts most churches need to make to produce world-impacting disciple makers. You can get this by going to ministryboom.com. That's ministryboom.com. This 5-page PDF is a discipleship alignment checklist that may surprise you. It will help you learn why programs are killing your discipleship, the number one default worker strategy that keeps churches from empowering their ministries. Learn the OGV factor and how it can revolutionize discipleship, attendance, and evangelism in your church. Again, go to ministryboom.com. The Georgia Baptist Mission Board is able to provide resources like this because of gifts from Georgia Baptist to the cooperative program. For more information on this broadcast and a customized discipleship plan for your church, visit gabaptist.org/discipleship. And by the way, if you found this content helpful, we sure hope you'll share it with a friend. And thanks so much for partnering with us to make world-impacting disciple makers.